So this is what they call the life of a retired pensioner. I'm now here at the terrace of my house. It is drizzling outside, so I had to take cover. And otherwise, the cameras will be drenched in water from the rain. So here I am. And why am I here? Well, yesterday I made the blog, and it was all about the energy pathways in humans, in animals. We talk about glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. And yesterday, I think I said a lot about the role of energy, of glucose, of fatty acids, of insulin, and incidence of diabetes. And so, as they say, strike while the iron is hot. There are so many ideas in my mind right now, and I don't want to lose these thoughts because, as you know, I'm not very young. I'm 65 years old, and it's now December. It's my birthday month. I'll be turning 66 on the 30th. And as a senior, I know I'm prone to diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So while I still remember the issues that I have to bring up to you, so here I am. And I would like to just go back on the things that I said because when I reviewed the blog, the video, there were some things that were not very clear or were not lengthily explained to you because of time, the constraints of time. I think yesterday I talked about fats, about the condition of nutrition in ruminants, and just to recap, I think I said that ruminants may be a very good model for the management of diabetes because in diabetes, the problem is about the high levels of sugar in the blood that circulates. And I think I also said that in ruminants, it's not blood glucose that predominantly circulates in the bloodstream. Rather, it is the fatty acids that are the results of microbial digestion in the forestomach, the rumen, the reticulum, and the omasum of ruminants, which gives a very good source for the ruminant all of its energy requirements to live a very simple pastoral life. And I think I also said yesterday that if only Dr. Grace Tan and Dr. Lustig could see the model of the nutrition and energy metabolism in the ruminant, probably it could help in adding up more information about the management of diabetes in humans. And I think I also touch on the role of sugars, uh, the advantageous and disadvantageous role of insulin in relation to diabetes and other ailments. And I want to expound on that, especially we can talk about the role of fats in human nutrition with the background of the role of fats in ruminants. And so probably we can start with the role of sugars and insulin. So I said in the previous blog that diabetes happens when there is too much sugar in the bloodstream, and that the coping mechanism, which is basically the insulin pathway, is not enough, or that there is not enough supply of insulin from the pancreas, or that the cells that are supposed to react to the stimulus of insulin are no longer capable. And this is what we call the insulin resistance phenomenon. Uh, I think that's a good point, a starting point for this blog. And so, I was reviewing the video of yesterday, and well, of course, there are some glitches. If you notice, the video was a mirror image of what I intended the image to be, so that the figures that I showed on TV coming from my laptop, uh, well, as I said, it's the mirror image, and pardon me for that. I think the excuse is that I am a neophyte, and with regards to blogging, I still have, as they say in the vernacular, I still need to eat a lot of rice. No pun intended for the low carb diet. So, uh, insulin, I think I said yesterday that aside from its role in the management of high blood glucose levels in humans and in monogastrics, also has some other effects on the cells of the body, particularly taking the cue from Dr. Lustig that insulin is actually a growth factor. So, for those who are in the molecular science field, do not mistake it for the different factors that we have been discussing in our classes. I refer to insulin like growth factor 1 and insulin growth factor 2. No, 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 I'm not referring to those factors. I'm rather referring to insulin itself. And what is that? If you have IGF-1 and IGF-2 and you compare that to insulin, the reason that IGF-1 and IGF-2 are called IGF or insulin-like growth factors is because it probably mimics the effects of insulin. And what is that? Well, it stimulates growth. And I think I said yesterday in the blog that one other effect of insulin is that it stimulates receptive cells to perform the function of growth. And what is growth? It's basically an increase in the number of cells, or an increase in the size of the cell. And if you take the cue from that, it would be like on repeated stimulus of insulin, cells grow and multiply. Now, if you look at the consequence of that, and in relation to human health and disease, this is a disadvantage. Why is it a disadvantage? Because in the regular presence of insulin, cells that are not supposed to grow, like cancer cells, are encouraged and stimulated to grow. So, what does that mean? It simply means, now tracing back the pathway, if you have high blood glucose circulating in your system, and it happens that you have an early stage of cancer, the repeated stimulation or release of insulin to control the high blood glucose levels will, as a consequence, stimulate the cancer cells and support their growth. So, if you look at the implication of that, a high blood glucose level circulating in your bloodstream and the normal action of insulin in these cases uh, for the main purpose of storing the excess glucose, actually, the consequence is that insulin will stimulate the growth of cancer cells. So, if you make the connection with the low carb diet, it simply means that if you are able to control the spikes of blood glucose levels in your blood and control the release of insulin from the pancreas, you basically also control the growth of cancer cells. So, again, to make it simple, the repeated stimulation of insulin in people with cancers actually exacerbates the cancer itself. And this is not a product of my own research, rather, I am just borrowing the idea that I learned from Dr. Lustig. So, there is definitely a connection between high blood sugar and the growth of cancers. Now, is it totally bad? Well, Dr. Lustig he says it like this. You see, if you look at the growth phase of humans and even other animals, there is a thing called the growth phase. And that's true. We are born as babies, infants. We have a period of around several years, maybe 9, maybe 8, up to 10 or even 11, depending on the level of nutrition that we get, until we reach the age and stage of puberty. Now, if you talk of reproduction, it's basically defined that the moment you reach puberty, you are considered to be an adult. But under social terms, for example, in the Philippines, an adult is defined to be at least 18 years old. So, if the age of puberty comes anywhere from 8 to about 11 or 12 years of age in kids, there is still that growth phase occurring until about 18, 19, or even 20. So, what is the connection with insulin? Definitely, you need lots of energy to grow, and you need insulin to support that growth. And that is where the advantage of insulin comes. And digesting what Dr. Lustig says, so after the growth phase, then the role of insulin is rather disadvantageous to human health. And what is that? Since the growth phase has already reached its peak, uh, there is less growth that occurs uh, under the situation where you have become an adult, and therefore there is a lesser need for insulin uh, to be acting on the blood glucose levels in your system. So it is also at the adult stage where most of the cancers start to appear. Of course, there are cancers in children, but that's another point of discussion. So, what I'm basically saying is that if you control insulin or the release of insulin, particularly after the growth phase, then probably you'll have better health and you can probably escape the dangers of developing cancers. Now, what is the connection to the low carb diet? The low carb diet is an assurance that your blood glucose levels do not spike. And if the blood glucose levels do not spike, consequently, there is no insulin release. If there is no insulin release, then the cancer cells that are starting to develop will have no reason nor support to continue growing. In fact, there is a term that Dr. Lustig uses, and I think even Dr. Josephine Grace Rojo Tan has mentioned this, that with the low carb diet, you actually starve the cancer cells. And if the cancer cells do not get their nutrient requirements, they stop growing. Now, is it good or bad? Of course it is good, because if the cancer cells are starved, they will not be able to divide, and most likely they just become senile, or they reach a period of senility and eventually they die. So, if you make the connection between low carb diets and intermittent fasting to the control of cancers, then it is clearly connected that the low carb diet is actually a hedge against the growth of cancer cells. So that's one advantage of the low carb diet, and that's also one of the reasons why I advocate people to take the low carb diet intermittent fasting regime, because I'm just mentioning one benefit. So, about insulin resistance, which I think I discussed in that blog yesterday. So, how does insulin resistance develops? Well, it's very simple. Repeated, occasional, and consistent levels of insulin being released into the system to control the consistently high amount of blood glucose circulating in your system leads to insulin resistance. So it's like, you can compare it to the fairy tale, if you may call it, about the boy who cried wolf. And what is that? So, well, you know the story. The boy who cried wolf. He was instructed to shout whenever the wolf appears, and he did it. Except that even if there was no wolf that appeared, he cried wolf. And so he was doing it repeatedly, 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 until the time came that the wolf came. And the people were just fed up with the pranks of this boy that when the real thing happened, meaning that the real wolf appeared, the people were no longer they were no longer responsive to the call of the boy that a wolf was coming. And so what happened? Well, probably the boy ended in the wolf's stomach. And that can be a parallelism that probably we can say about insulin. So if you are in a state where you constantly have high blood glucose levels and therefore consistently have high insulin releases, the system becomes so fed up or used up with the presence of insulin that some cells begin to become resistant. And that's a problem. That's a problem. It's not only for cancers, it's a problem for diabetics. So that I think Dr. Grace Tan and Dr. Lastig will agree with me that in the control of diabetes, it is very important not only to control high blood glucose levels, but also to control the releases of insulin. The frequent releases of insulin is the problem here. Because the hormone not only acts as the agent that manages the storage of excess blood glucose, but that it also has its growth effects on the cells in the body, and that they are stimulated to grow when growth is no longer needed, as in the state of cancer. So, the low carb diet alleviates this situation because in the low carb diet, blood glucose levels are controlled and remain to the minimum. So, you expect that the releases of insulin will also be controlled, and this somehow preserves the reactive or sensitive state of the cells that are supposed to be affected by insulin. So it is only at the time that, well, the effect of insulin is really needed that probably the release of insulin is most welcome. And so that's another lesson that we learn from the low carb diets. Now, I think I did not touch on why intermittent fasting, the previous blog. And in the first blog, I said that the low carb diet supports intermittent fasting simply because you do not feel any hunger. I think I also said that there are practitioners of the low carb diet, intermittent fasting regime that only have one meal a day, and that some have two meals a day. And it's not an agony, I tell you, because from my own experience, if you do not feel any hunger pangs, then why do you eat or snack? And that's the point. So there is no urgent need to eat because, in the first place, you do not feel hungry. And if you want the background of this, it's something like this. So when you eat, especially if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, and carbohydrates that are composed of readily and easily digestible starch and sugars, they are easily broken down into simple sugars, and these simple sugars are absorbed by the gut and spilled into the bloodstream. So what happens is that these sugars, basically glucose, then increase the level of blood sugar, and there is a certain range, normal range, which is neither it's not low, nor is it too high, and that is the optimum range that we are talking about. This is the stable range where you don't have the urge to eat because there is no dictate that you are hungry and need to replenish your blood sugar. So, bearing in mind that you have that optimum range of blood glucose levels, the tendency for carb eaters is this: from a low, when you are hungry, okay, you eat, and when you eat a lot of carbs, the tendency is that the blood sugar rises over. So the blood sugar rises over the optimum range. And what is worst even is that it may go to a very high peak, and when it is stored on the action of insulin, definitely the blood glucose levels drop. Now, if it drops way below the optimum range of normal, okay, then you have the very strong urge to eat again. So what I'm saying is that if you have to take a look at the diagram of highs and lows with regards to blood sugar, it is something like this. It's like a wave with a very high crest and a very low trough. And that covers the optimal range. And that's the time when you feel sated or satiated when it comes to food. And that is also the time that you feel hungry when it's time to eat again. Now, how does the low carb diet control this? Well, the low carb diet, because there is a very low intake of carbohydrates, is that it maintains that wave within the normal range. So, what is the implication of that? Well, if the wave of blood glucose levels in the blood is maintained within the normal range, you do not feel hungry. So, if you do not feel hungry, you have no urge to eat. And in that case, blood glucose levels are at the optimum level, and the body maintains itself in a stable state. So, the worst that can happen is that the distance between the crest and the trough is so large that, of course, if that is the case, there is a very high peak or crest of blood sugar, then you need insulin to lower it down. So, with frequent occurrences of that phenomenon of very high crest and very low trough, you expect that there will be constant releases of insulin, which, of course, can damage the system. So, I think that is quite a technical explanation of why the low carb diet supports intermittent fasting, simply because you maintain the rise and fall of blood sugar within that optimal range that you do not feel hungry. So I tell you, if do not be frightened by the term intermittent fasting in low carb diets, simply because you don't need to exert any effort to do fasting. No, no need. Just do it naturally. You only eat when you feel hungry. Now, prolonged fasting is also good. Meaning, even if you have that urge to eat, you control that urge and do not eat. Okay? So what is the implication of that? Well, your blood glucose levels probably might be in that optimal range, except that the wave has dipped. Okay? It has dipped into the trough, and maybe you feel a little bit hungry, but it's still controllable. Now, prolong that urge to eat, and what happens? The body will sense it immediately. Well, it's the function of the hypothalamus. So, if the hypothalamus senses that the body needs uh, a source of energy to maintain its function, then in the absence of intakes of energy sources, the consequence will be that the hypothalamus releases some release factors that will stimulate the pancreas to release another hormone which is called glucagon. So instead of insulin, because there is no rise in blood sugar, the hypothalamus releases a releasing hormone that acts on the pancreas so that glucagon is released and it goes into the bloodstream. It spreads to all parts of the body and it acts on the sources of potential energy for the maintenance of the optimal blood glucose levels. So, the body has emergency measures. And this is basically the point why I brought it up, that as for the pathway for the metabolism of energy in the body, there are two ways. One is the glycolysis, which needs insulin, of course, and that basically is the pathway taken when you ingest carbohydrates, basically, and that these carbohydrates are broken down in the gut, and carbohydrates are metabolized into simple sugars that are absorbable by the gut vascular system, and these blood sugars go into the bloodstream. So that's basically the point. Um, so when glucagon is released, it then stimulates the receptive cells, particularly fat cells, even the liver, to start to degrade either the glycogen that is stored in the liver or the fats that are stored in other parts of the body. And I think I didn't mention yesterday's blog that aside from the fats that you notice physically, there is also what we call visceral fat. And visceral fat is not readily seen except the bulge probably in your tummy. And that is even worse because visceral fat is not seen. I think if I have to follow the logic of Dr. Lustig, visceral fat probably will be the last site of fats that will be used up for the production of energy at the time that energy is required by the body in the absence of circulating blood glucose coming from the absorption of simple sugars in the gut. So, the first sites of fat that have to go are the peripheral fat, meaning the fat from your belly but not inside. Uh, Probably the other fats under your skin. And on the action of glucagon, the process of gluconeogenesis is set on, and then the fats are broken down into, of course, the simple fatty acids, and finally, in the pathway of gluconeogenesis, these are converted to sugars, particularly glucose. On the other hand, the effect of glucagon on the liver is that from the stores of glycogen, in the process we call glycogenolysis, these stored carbohydrates are then broken down or metabolized into simple sugars, and it is part of glycolysis basically, but it's just a fraction of the reverse pathway, wherein instead of simple blood glucose turning into a complex mass of glycogen, the stored glycogen in the liver is broken down and brought back to form the simple sugar glucose. And that's called glycogenolysis. And glycogenolysis is basically also dependent on the action of insulin. So here comes that insulin again. Anyway, for the breakdown of fats and your fat reserves in the absence of available blood sugar, the fats will undergo the pathway of gluconeogenesis, and these fats are turned into fatty acids, and later on through the process of gluconeogenesis, these fatty acids are then turned into sugars, particularly glucose. So, referring back to why intermittent fasting in the low carb diet is something like you stimulate the system to use up your stores of potential energy sources like glycogen and fat to be used as sources of energy under emergencies or when there is not enough supply of glucose from the diet. And what is the advantage of this? Well, for those who want to lose fat, fasting is a very effective remedy. And what is the good thing about this is that you lose fat without the release of insulin. So basically, it's glucagon. Okay? So, again, in terms of the health benefits, well, if you reduce the role of insulin and rely on other hormones like glucagon, then probably it would be a healthier and a better option because of the harmful effects of insulin, the repeated release of insulin in the system. So that basically sums up why you have a low carb diet dash intermittent fasting regime. So I hope that you understand that well. But from my experience, I assure you, fasting is not an agony in the low carb diet regimen. It comes naturally. As long as you discipline yourself and probably your mouth, that, there are some people who just eat, they live to eat, I should say, meaning even if they don't feel hungry, they eat. It's a joy to them. But look at what happens to their system. You know, most of these people who live to eat suffer from many disorders and diseases brought about by consistently high blood glucose levels, consistently high releases of insulin, and, well, you know the aftermath of that. So, would you say that these people who live to eat are healthy? I don't know. But probably they may not be healthy physically, and sometimes, pardon me for the term, They may not even be healthy mentally. And that's the catch. So, I guess let's control our diet. So we remain physically healthy and mentally healthy, and that's very important. And especially for people like me who are already retired, then of course we can say that we have crossed the bridge where life seems to be like in the airport. You have checked in, uh, you have passed the immigration section. Of course, you do not pass the customs section because you do not have anything to bring with you anyway. And that, most seniors are already in the departure lounge. But, of course, the beauty of being in the departure lounge only happens when you are distracted by so many beautiful things and people. If you want to eat, there are shops where you can eat. If you want to shop, there are shops where you can shop till you drop dead. No, 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 no. I'm sorry for that term. Till you drop, okay? Because you are already in the departure lounge, and well, you are about to board the plane to see our friend JC. So I guess that sums up what I need to say about low carb diets and intermittent fasting, the basic principles that are involved, the good and the bad role of insulin, the good and the bad role of consistently high blood glucose levels for good health. So, if you do not believe me, then just consider it as some food for thought. Food for thought. Okay, so I guess I have enlightened you a bit about what happens. So, in the low carb diet, let me just summarize. There is intermittent fasting, which, as I said from experience, is not an agony to do. You do not have to exert extra effort to do fasting because it comes naturally, provided that you eat only when you feel hungry. So, it's very common that if you have a very good breakfast composed of low carbs, mostly fiber, meat, fish, eggs, or whatever, then you can last until, in my experience, I can last until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and have another meal. No snacking in between, except probably some water. And, well, some would say, would fruit juices be okay? Now, here is what I learned from Dr. Grace Tan. Um, Normally, fruit juices are not included as good food when it comes to the low carb diet. Why? Well, even if you say natural fruit, it contains a lot of sugars, particularly fructose. And why fructose? Well, because it's a sugar that is mostly found in fruits. That's why the term fructose. So, if you take fruit juices, especially at that period of time in between meals, you get plenty of sugars, particularly fructose. And I guess in the first video, I said that the culprit in most disorders involving high blood glucose levels together with insulin resistance and fatty liver syndrome, is that fructose was found to be the culprit in most cases. Now, Dr. Lustig adds another view, and he said, when he was asked by someone if fruits were okay, and he said something like this: so nature has provided us with fruits. So what's wrong with it? We, what he means is this. So if it is a fruit, eat it. Probably the only forbidden fruit was that in the Garden of Eden, which led us to this, well, miserable life instead of that eternal life that we're supposed to have received when God created Adam and Eve. Anyway, Dr. Lustig says, if nature has provided us with a fruit to eat, and Dr. Grace Tan says, no, the fruits, especially the sweet fruits, are not good, then there is some disparity between that view of Dr. Grace Tan and Dr. Lustig. But here comes the logic of Dr. Lustig. And he says, well, if you have to take fruits, you have to take in everything. Oh, take in everything, meaning if you can eat the rind of the fruit, eat it. If you can eat the seed of the fruit, eat it. Why? Well, because it is true that the juice of the fruit is composed of the sugar, particularly fructose, and that when you process it, you only take the juice which contain the fructose, and what you leave out are the fibers. So, Dr. Lustig presents a better view. Why? Because he says you have to eat everything if you can. Even if you have to eat the peel or the rind, or you can eat the seed, then do it. Why? Because of course you take in a lot of sugars, particularly fructose, but together with the other parts of the fruit, you also get fiber. And what is the effect of that? Well, in the gut, it is true that the fruit juice contains a lot of sugars like fructose, but that in the presence of a significant amount of crude fiber, the absorption of the simple sugar fructose in the gut is affected somehow by the presence of the crude fiber. And it basically slows down the absorption of the fructose, so that you can expect that you enjoy the sweet fruit, but you do not suffer the consequence of a high blood glucose level after eating. Makes sense. So again, I support the view of Dr. Lustig more than what is currently recommended by the group of Dr. Grace Tan. That sweet fruits should be, you know, you should shun away from sweet fruits particularly because they contain a lot of sugars. And the no-no here is that never drink processed fruit juice. Okay? If you are to follow the low carb diet, processed foods are a no-no. Even if you tell me, well, can vegetables be processed? Well, the answer is yes. It's being done by the food industry. You get a lot of processed vegetables and fruits from the supermarket. But from the point of view of low carb diets, it's not recommended simply because, for example, processed fruit juices, you take only the sugar, you have taken away that important part of the crude fiber. And processing also means probably heating for sterilization. And so you lose a lot of nutrients and other elements that would contribute to a healthy nutrition. So I think that's about the way that we go with regards to the consumption of fruits and vegetables. And furthermore, Dr. Lustig says what nature provides is probably the perfect food that we have. And he simply means that, well, what God has provided us, probably it's the best for us. Meaning, um, if you have to consume vegetables and fruits, there needs to be no processing done. And Dr. Lustig says if you have to eat vegetables and if you can, eat them raw. And the same with fruits. Eat them raw. Because you receive the whole package as nature has provided it. And why is that so? Well, we started off, or the human life has started off from its beginnings of hunting and gathering. And I don't want to fuel the debate who won that competition between hunters and gatherers, but enough to say that those that evolved from the hunters are basically the people that prefer meat over uh, food from plant sources. And that the gatherers, um, well, they are the people who are prone to be eating only food from plant sources. And from Dr. Lustig, uh, I got this I got this information that I think also Dr. Grayston mentioned this, that if we have to receive the best form of the nutrients, we have to get it from animal sources. So there's meat, poultry, you have eggs, you have fish. Okay, that's basically for humans is the best source of nutrients that we can have in our diets. Why? Well, the reason is that most of these foods do not contain large amounts of crude fiber. Meaning, if you take in food from animal sources, it is readily absorbable and digestible in the gut so that you get readily the nutrients that are needed not only for energy but also for growth and development. And it makes sense. It makes sense. You get the finest protein or amino acids from animal sources, and there's no debating that. Well, those who are vegetarians will tell us or tell me, but we have a very good protein source, and that is soybean and its processed products like tofu. The truth is, for people who practice the vegetarian diet, uh, their physique or physical frames are probably an envy to most people because they do not bear too much fat. Uh, they are on the thinner side, and they claim that they are healthier than their counterparts on the opposite side. But Dr. Lustig says this, and it supports the research that I have done way back, in that vegetarians are deprived of basically two essential amino acids, and these are methionine and tryptophan. Essential in the sense that the body, our bodies, cannot manufacture it. From even if the precursors of these amino acids are there, no, no, no. The body cannot simply metabolize these precursors into the essential amino acid methionine and tryptophan. Now, why are these amino acids essential? Well, one case in point is tryptophan. It is an essential amino acid, and its role is that it becomes the source of the happy hormone serotonin. So, am I saying that vegetarians are not happy because they lack the serotonin hormone, the happy hormone? Well, the answer is I'm not saying that, and I don't know. If they are happy with their lives, there must be some other sources of that happiness. But basically, in the absence of the source of the happy hormone serotonin, then the mood changes very quickly from feeling of sadness to even feeling of depression and anxiety. And you need something to boost your mood up so that you need to get a good source of methionine and tryptophan. And we have a very good model in the sense that if you look at the diets of Indians, I mean, the people from India, uh, most of them, I don't know why, but probably because of the restriction of the availability of food, the social status, and so on and so forth, they practice very lax vegetarian diet regime. So, why a relaxed vegetarian regime? Simply because they eat a lot of vegetables, fruits, and many foods of plant origin. But, but, a big but, the thing is that they also consume dairy products and even eggs. And that was practiced even long before we call science science. How did they know that the best sources for methionine and tryptophan came from animal sources? Well, probably it must have been God given. You know, the Indians are very good in philosophizing, so let's give it to them. So, probably it must be God given that information that they can get tryptophan and methionine from animal sources, and that they use that to augment their diets of largely vegetarian in origin. And so, that is a very good model for vegetarians. And the strict vegetarian definitely will suffer the consequences of having no source of tryptophan and methionine. That's for sure. So I hope vegetarians who watch this channel are not angry with me, but that I'm just presenting the facts that are supported by research. And to discuss it further, Dr. Lustig says, of course, all of us are basically vegetarians. Hmm, basically vegetarians. Why? Well, we are basically vegetarians, but probably what? The second or the third stage vegetarian, meaning if we eat meat, this meat comes from animals that consume forages, plants, and he says, so if you eat beef, that beef has been fattened on pasture using grass and plants, other plants. So we can say that the first order of the vegetarian is the cow, probably. We might be the second order because we eat the flesh of the cow. Oh, that's good. That's good. So we can trace back our history to being just vegetarians. Now, about fish and that idea, he says if you have to consume fish, the preference should be the smaller ones. Why the smaller ones? Because the smaller ones are at the base of the food chain. Or is it the other way? No, that on top of the food chain are the predators, and the base are the prey. So why the small fish? Small fish species are basically, well, I don't know if they can be called vegetarian, but that these small species of fish basically feed on planktons, which are basically plant in nature. And that, since they consume a lot of planktons, they are the best sources of the best fatty acids that you can ever have. So, you may ask the question, why? Can we not manufacture the essential fatty acids? And the answer is no. We are very, very poor converters of the essential fatty acids that are required in healthy in healthy human condition. So we cannot or we do not readily convert, even if the precursors of essential fatty acids are there, we cannot manufacture them. That's why they are called essential, simply because we have to take it from outside sources. And Dr. Lustig says the best source is, of course, the plankton eating fish. Of course, there is no debate that you should limit your diet only to the small plankton eating fish or fish species. There are also uh, second order fish species that feed on the small fish that feed on the planktons, and therefore if they feed on the smaller fish that eat the planktons, they also get that essential fatty acids that are so important when you take a meal of of seafood and fish. And it makes sense. Now, better still, if even if these are second order plankton eaters, meaning the plankton has passed through the first order, which are the small fish species, and these are ingested by the second order types of fishes like salmon. Well, it's still good because salmon is fatty, the meat, the flesh is fatty, and that the fat is of course rich in the essential fatty acids that we need. So we do not just focus on salmon in low carb diets, but also we need to look at the other types that probably will give us better essential fatty acids. Of course, I already talked about omega 3 and omega 6. And the ratio of fat, I will not no longer use the term bad fat and good fat, but rather the ratio between omega 3 and omega 6 is such that it's very close to that ideal ratio of 1 omega 3 for every 3 to 4 omega 6. And so that's probably can be your guide in formulating your low carb diets. All right. So, what can we add more? Well, as far as the essential fatty acids is concerned, again, they are called essential because we cannot manufacture them in our system. We have to take it from outside sources. And again, we need to have a steady supply of this in order to maintain a healthy body and healthy mind. So, well, there is no specific low carb diet, unlike the diets that we had before. Of course, you have the Atkins diet, which started it all. I think the Atkins diet was proposed in the 1930s or 1940s. Dr. Grayston can correct me on this. What is the Atkins diet? It's the precursor of the, what's that? South Beach diet. It has been a fad about 20 years ago that to become chic, you order from a certain supplier of the South Beach diet, you pay a lot of money. But I don't know, I don't understand the principle of that, except that probably it comes from the Atkins diet. So again, similar to the low carb diet, the Atkins diet is something like you need to reduce your intake of carbohydrates. You instead rely on meats, fish, and fats. And it so happened that the Atkins diet was not adopted because of that problem that Dr. Lastic pointed out. When instead of sugars being blamed for most of the disorders in human nutrition, human society, fats were made the scapegoat or the alibi. And so I think that's about it. Again, I have not kept track of time. I don't know how long the video will be, but I think I have said some of the things that I needed to say today. And I hope that more information is being given to you. I'm just an instrument. I hope I'm not a harbinger of bad things to come, rather an angel of an angel. Oh, do I fit the role of an angel? Probably not. Let's just say I am just a messenger. of the good things about the low carb diet and intermittent fasting regime. So, yeah, well, I think I've said enough for today. I can reserve it again for tomorrow, so you will have more. But as usual, I stop here and say thank you for watching. Uh, enjoy your life, enjoy your friends, and most especially enjoy your food. So again, goodbye, and please do not forget to give me a like, to share the video, this video, and to subscribe to my channel so that we have this channel maintained until the very end, when most of the information that you need to support you in adopting the low carb diet is already given to you, and that it can help you establish a healthy low carb diet, intermittent fasting regime, and of course, as a consequence, live a happy, healthy, and normal life. So, see you next video.